Hello everyone, welcome to Agyre Caps. Today I'm going to tell you a story about infinite loops. It all started with these two thieves. On this day, Carlos arrived home with the money from the robbery. He found Oliver looking scared. Carlos asked him what had happened, but Oliver remained silent. But before Carlos could figure out what was going on, a man with a gun suddenly appeared behind him. Anthony said he was a detective. He was here to arrest them, so that's why Oliver was so scared. Anthony had been waiting for Carlos to come home. Carlos was afraid to talk because Anthony was threatening him, but that's when Carlos knocked Anthony's gun out of the refrigerator door when he wasn't looking. He knocked him to the ground, and then he grabbed Oliver to run away with him. The two of them went down the hallway in a panic, but Anthony was right behind them. In order to prevent them from escaping, he opened fire downstairs. The bullet hit Carlos in the leg. Just as he was about to take them back to the station, a strange thing happened. They went to the first floor, but they couldn't get the door open. But what's even more bizarre is that they were clearly in the hallway marked as the first floor. But when looked down, there were many more floors below. But Anthony didn't think too much about it. He just escorted them to the next floor. But things kept getting worse and worse. It seemed like the building was endless. Then Anthony looked up in confusion and found that there was still no end to the building, looking at this strange hallway. At first, Anthony thought the Carlos brothers were behind it. Otherwise, how could a normal hallway have no exit? Until he was puzzled and went down one floor at a time. But in the end, he came back to the same place again. Anthony couldn't believe it. Terrified, he immediately turned around. Without looking back, he began to go up. But the result is still back to the same place again. Until this moment, they realized the gravity of the situation. It seemed that they were trapped here forever, and there was no way to find a way out. Anthony took out a key and threw it down, but the key miraculously fell down from the upper floor after realizing the truth. They were suffocating in their despair, but luckily there's a vending machine at the corner of the building. Although they were trapped here, at least they don't have to worry about food for a while, but without medication. Carlos's gunshot wound got worse and worse, until 26 hours after they were trapped. Carlos lost his life due to an infection in his wound, but just then, something strange happened again. All the food that they had eaten from the vending machine had reappeared. Anthony was devastated. This means they will be trapped here forever. And so, 35 years passed. The clean hallway had become a mess. Anthony had become an old, unkempt man. Although so many years had passed, their lives are very different. Knowing he can't leave, Anthony lives from day to day. The hallways are filled with his garbage. Now he eats nothing but instant noodles, and has lost even the most basic ability to live. But Oliver, on the other hand, is still able to make a living in this cramped hallway. Every day when he wakes up, he runs around the building. Then he takes a shower in a bathroom made of infinitely recycled water. And then he uses a simple comb made from a toothbrush in front of a mirror made of nail clippers to clean himself up. And after all that, Oliver prayed to a red school bag, and he looked very pious because the bag contained all the things he needed to survive. Then he skillfully organized everything in the bag. Compare that to the state of the two of them. Oliver and Anthony were trapped in a loop, but their time and lives are being lost in a positive direction, which means if they can't break the cycle, they'll be stuck here until they die at the same time. In the 35 years that they've been together, the hatred between them had long since dissipated, and Anthony had a vague recollection of something important he wanted to tell Oliver, but he couldn't remember what it was until the day Anthony, who was nearing the end of his life, finally remembered what it was that he wanted to tell Oliver. It was the truth about the cycle they were trapped in. Anthony said that if he told Oliver what he remembered, that he was going to die. And then he continued, all of this is a lie, that the 35 years of their lives that had disappeared didn't exist, and his name wasn't Anthony. His name is Daniel. He's the one who got himself and Oliver into this loop. And then Daniel started to remember. When he was 10 years old, his mother and stepfather took him and his sister on a trip. When they stopped at a gas station, Roberto, the stepfather, didn't know that Daniel's sister was allergic to drinks, so he gave her a sip of the drink. But shortly after they continued on their journey, Daniel's sister suffered an asthma attack. The bad thing is that Roberto accidentally broke her medicine, but his mother didn't have time to blame him. She asked Daniel to get some extra medicine, but Daniel said he'd forgotten to pick them up on his way out. As she watched her daughter suffocate, she told Roberto to turn the car around and drive back. Soon, they were back at the gas station, but strangely enough, the gas station was empty. Luckily, the mother had found a box of pills at the gas station. Roberto drove on, but actually came back to the gas station. They got out of the car to double check. They finally realized they were stuck on an endless stretch of highway. Roberto told his wife and Daniel to stay put. He went to get help, but as soon as Roberto left, Daniel's sister's condition got worse, so the panicked mother drove on, ignoring Roberto's advice, but it was all in vain. There was no way she could break the loop. Daniel held his sister and screamed for the car to stop, but the mother seems to have lost her mind. She thought it was all just a nightmare, and as Daniel pleaded and pleaded, she finally stopped the car and let him take her alone, and then she kept driving like a madwoman because she believed that everything would come back when the nightmare woke up. But a few hours later, she realized it wasn't a dream at all. So she went to the supermarket, disoriented, like a corpse without a soul. She couldn't accept the death of her young daughter, and she couldn't do anything about it. The remaining 3 people have been stuck on an infinite loop of highway for 35 years. And here's the kicker. During that time, Roberto also had a vague recollection that he had something important to tell Daniel, but he couldn't remember what it was until the day Daniel's mother died. Roberto suddenly had a splitting headache. In a trance, he seemed to remember the truth of everything. He told Daniel that what they were experiencing was not real. Then Roberto asked Daniel to write down his own name so that he wouldn't forget himself, and that he'd been asked to do it before, but he didn't do it. That's why Roberto forgot who he was. But Daniel was adamant that he wouldn't forget. Roberto goes on to tell that he was forced to tell Daniel that once he got in the police car, he'd forget all about himself. But before Daniel knew what was going on, Roberto continued. His real name is not Roberto, but Lumu. This is the second loop he's been through. The first time was at the age 10 on a school trip. He was on a raft with a friend and an instructor. Unexpectedly, the instructor caused an accident. Roberto's friend died from his injuries. They spent the next 35 years alone on the raft until the instructor died and told him how to get to land. In addition to that, the instructor said he spent 35 years on a train that never stopped. That means that the instructor, like Roberto, had gone through 2 loops in his life until the end of his life. The infinite loop is like a spell. It's impossible to break it. And now it's happening to Daniel. If Daniel gets into the police car, he'll forget himself, just like Roberto. He'll wait until death to remember who he really is and why he's trapped in an infinite loop. That's why Roberto warned Daniel not to get into the police car, or when he remembers who he is, he'll be as sorry as he was. And with that, Roberto lost his life. But in the face of Roberto's warnings, when the police car appeared on the highway, Daniel couldn't resist. He decided to get in the car again. History repeated itself. Just as Daniel opened the car door, he forgot who he was. He became a cop. And then he came to Carlos's house to arrest them, which led to him and Oliver being trapped in the hallway for 35 years until the end of his life. The detective remembered he was Daniel, so he told Oliver the same thing. Tell him to write down his name and warned him never to enter the elevator. It's the only way to break the loop, or what he's going through now. Oliver would have to go through again. And with that, Daniel lost his life. But Oliver, trapped for 35 years, couldn't resist stepping into the elevator and became an elevator attendant. Then the bride and groom stepped into the elevator. But as he was leaving the elevator, Oliver accidentally put a bee in the groom's backpack, and then he threw it on the floor. And the groom was so angry that he tried to pick up the backpack. Accidentally, he was stung by the bee. What's worse is that he's allergic to bees, and the allergy medicine was already broken. All that's left for the groom to do is die. But by causing an accident, a new loop would be created. So Oliver, who had forgotten who he was, will continue to be trapped. With his bride, he will remain trapped in this hotel corridor for 35 years until he dies. And that's the end of the movie. But why did Daniel and Robert say that the loops they were trapped in were all fake? That's because they weren't real in the loop. They're just a double of themselves in reality. And the so-called loop space is actually their inner demon. They trapped themselves there. They don't want to leave. In reality, the detective did succeed in arresting the Oliver brothers, but because of his first shooting experience. When he came home and found his wife cheating on him, he didn't hesitate to shoot the man, and he was arrested and sent to prison for it. He spent the rest of his life in prison, and as a cop, he felt guilty for killing on impulse. So he trapped his mind forever in that building with no exit to atone for his sins. As for Roberto, it was his fault that led to the death of Daniel's sister, and since then, his wife fought with him every day, and that's how they got divorced. And after the divorce, he lost all hope in life, so he started to get by. He drank himself into oblivion and trapped his mind in that endless highway. In other words, every person who is stuck in the loop is in fact a self-chastisement and redemption.